Howdy soldiers, it's a cozy rainy day outside, so I thought I would put on a full face of makeup and get myself a tea and go on a little, video essay deep dive, because it's more fun than writing my actual university essay. I'm not procrastinating, why would you say that? I've done a bunch of videos before on the aging up of YA. In fact, you can check out the video named just that. That's right, I know where my cards are now. I am unstoppable. There's also a couple videos floating around on my channel about new adult books and my thoughts towards like sex in YA books or the maturation of the genre as a whole. But like I mentioned in my book consumerism video, when something gets stuck in my head, it gets lodged in there, and then I can't think about anything else until I have done the thing. And in today's scenario, it is talking about lower YA. I don't really want to make like a thesis for this video, and it's not as structured as I want it to be, but like I'm just gonna talk, and we're gonna see how this goes. Although I'm sure editing Rachel is not gonna be super happy with me. Well, you got that right. This girl? Yeah, I have a bone to pick with that one right there. So without further ado, grab a drink, grab a snack, and let's talk about the decline and yet appreciation that we should have for lower YA. This was mostly spurred by actually a video I did like in the summertime. That is linked up there. That was YA books with no spice. And maybe this is just my For You page or the people that I am friends with on TikTok, but I've noticed on Book Talk there is a whole lot of love for spicy, sexy books, which do not get me wrong, I do happen to love myself. But I am also 26 and, have read a romance novel in my life. And as a book blogger in the young adult YA space, I'm talking about books that are specifically meant for teenagers. But because I am also older, basically one foot in the grave by now, I will label any videos or TikToks that I make about specifically adult books. And while adult fantasy and young adult fantasy are a Venn diagram, both of those age bands have different boundaries and expectations, which brings up questions of like what is age appropriate for what audience and how much do you go into a maybe darker, deeper topic when you're talking about it with like an 8-year-old versus when you're talking about it with a 28-year-old. I got a really good response from that No Spice YA video because I have a lot of people who follow me who are teenagers, that be because of politics or religion or upbringing or just general sense of personhood, don't want to read about romance or sex or not have that feature as a major plot in their book. I'm also popping on here to quickly say that I do most often use sex and romance as an example because it's the easiest and the most like widely spread, because for some reason violence doesn't have as much of a stigma as like kissing does, which is a whole other video. But this can also apply to things like violence, gore, all kinds of sexuality, mental issues, politics. And even when I was doing that video, I noticed that it's really hard to find books that don't have those plots. In that video, I go into how young adult books have matured a lot in the last decade, and how originally they were a lot less violent or sexy, and now especially the trend is towards these super dark, super gritty, super gory, super sexy young adult novels, and that's kind of like all that's being published, and that's not all everybody wants to read. And in there, I also said that is likely because of a growing adult reader base of young adult books, and how adults are the people who have money, and people who have money will dictate what is popular because they can afford to buy it. So the adults are buying up all of these older YA books or new adult books because that's what adults like to read, whereas the actual teenagers who this genre is meant for, may I remind you, are not having the opportunity to like dictate what becomes popular. In the publishing world, you have age bands which dictate what books fall under what age category and therefore age appropriateness. So let's see if my ex-bookstore employee can remember them all. We have the 0 to 2 board books, then you have 4 to 6 first readers, then you have 5 to 8 picture books. Oh my god, this is painful. Okay, so what past Rachel did was an abomination. I should have my English degree revoked for this. So let's actually go over this. We got the 0 to 2 board books. We have the 3 to 5 picture books. We have the 5 to 8 first readers / chapter books. We have 9 to 12 middle grade, and then we have 13 plus YA, and then 18 plus is everything else. Okay. Back to scheduled programming. And the line between middle grade and young adult gets a little blurry sometimes because 9 to 12 and then 13 plus, what if you're a 12, 13-year-old? I was still reading middle grade things when I was like 14 or 15. There are kids who I helped when I worked at the bookstore who were like 11 who had a much higher reading level, but I couldn't necessarily recommend them like Kingdom of the Wicked or like ACOTAR because that's I feel like I'm being a bad responsible adult if I do that. Middle grade is very similar to young adult in that, you know, 9 to 12, that's quite a large age range, as is 13 to 18. You change so much in those years, as does your reading comprehension between 9 and 12. But then again, a lot of people say that an upper middle grade and a lower YA shouldn't have their own sections because technically it's all just children's literature, which, may I remind you, does not make it any less valuable. Yet other people I know have specifically said to mention it to an agent if you're pitching a book, to pitch it as an upper middle grade or a lower YA, to better help the agent understand what that book is and to, you know, better help sell it. But even then, it's so hard to know what is what, because even in young adult there's like a lower YA and then there's like 14 plus and then there's like 16 plus. So it's basically this big old mess of people trying to figure out what a book is and like who it's appropriate for, which there is no one answer to that. And due to that inconsistent and transitory nature of that age range of like tween to teen, YA just is having an identity crisis. And honestly, I don't blame it because I did the same thing at 13. So the commercial appeal of an older, grittier YA novel has pushed the entire industry into really favoring that. That is so opposite of what the genre was A, started as, B, intended for, and C, what it was like 10 years ago when I started reading YA. Wait, no, that would have been like 14 years ago? I'm a mortal being who is forever and slowly moving towards the inevitable moment of my death. Let's move on. But back in 2004, you know, YA novels were not these dark, gritty, sexy books. This is where the divide happens. I think it's really interesting. The last year that I worked in the bookstore was when To All the Boys I Loved Before, the movie came out. And so we were selling more of the book. And everybody that bought that book from me was an actual teenager. Same thing with Cole Sprouse was in it. The sickness one, 5 Feet Apart. I read that book. I thought it was fine. I have my own problems with like sickness books, but that's my own thing. And yet that was one of the most popular books with the teen audience in my store. And adults I knew that were reading To All the Boys I Loved Before or reviewing 5 Feet Apart thought that the books were like dumb and sappy and that people were making bad decisions. And I'm like, yeah, that's the whole point. The main characters are 16. Were you making good decisions when you were 16? I was not. I had side bangs that were constantly crooked and my eyebrows were 2 different shapes. I was wearing yellow foundation for like a whole 3 years, and like I had a crush on 3 boys all named Johnny who never spoke to me and I never spoke to them. It was not peak Rachel at 16 in 2011. I also want to make it clear that adults like YA because of things like the pacing, the characters, the fact that because YA is meant for a younger audience, it's easier to genre bend and genre blend. You can be a lot more creative. You don't have such strict boundaries as other genres have. Like, I'm not trying to say that you can only be, you know, under the age of 18 to enjoy it. Adults have to remember that while you can enjoy YA, it's not meant for you. And that is the whole argument that I see when people are like, oh, this book wasn't sexy enough. First of all, if you want to watch teenagers having sex, I think that says a lot about you. And secondly, there is literally, like, the rest of the store is meant for you. Go find a fantasy book that is for adults, or go read an adult romance novel, and that will solve your problem. Don't get mad at YA for, like, not being gory enough or not being sexy enough. Okay, I'm ranting. We need to get back on track to lower YA. Going back to that very strange era that was the early 2000s, those books weren't focused on being edgy. They were focused on telling you a story, and it often focused on the younger end of what being a young adult is. And the popular things that are being written in books now, like more graphic gore or violence or romance, are often things that make these books inaccessible to a younger reader. Be that a parent not feeling comfortable buying that for their child, or the idea that if something has a lot of violence or romance, it will be likely to be taken off of curriculum adaptations for school usage, so you can't use it when teaching something. So that means that in publishing, a lot of authors who are writing younger YA or older middle grade feel like they get skipped over and are being missed out on because there is no place for their books in the YA market. because YA is trending towards dark and gritty. Not to say that the books nowadays that do have political statements like The Hate You Give, or go into super high fantasy like Saba Tahir, I don't think those books are bad or that like, oh, we shouldn't have them, because like any genre, it's going to adapt, and I personally think those adaptations are good. However, 12 to 18 is a huge developmental period of your life. You change so much in those years, and what you read and what you consume changes so much in those years. So there is a niche and a need for a lower, less aggressive YA novel for people who are 12 and like want to start getting into reading a little bit older books. Because it's really hard to go from The Tale of Emily Winsnap into suddenly Cruel Prince. There is a big divide between these two books. And just like anything new, you gotta ease into it, you know, start building blocks. You know, you need some swim lessons before you can jump in the deep end. I also want to say that there is this weird assumption that you can't talk to a 14-year-old about anything problematic or grown up. Like, you can't talk about politics, you can't talk about violence, you can't talk about sexuality, when that's absolutely not true, because you can explain those concepts to a younger person or have them as themes in your books. You just have to, have a certain voice when you're going about it, and you're also going to talk about that topic in maybe more or less depth depending on the age that you're writing for. So there is value and space to fill that niche. It's really hard to find newer books that are a lower YA. So a lot of the ones I end up recommending are, from a decade ago. Not to say that the writing isn't good, it's just that maybe it's a little bit different than what a teenager nowadays wants to read. But I think the standard of upper middle grade and lower YA is mostly that it's a little bit cleaner, so there's no swearing, there's typically very little or no romance. I've also noticed that younger YA novels tend to be a lot more relatable, which is like so interesting, because it's like, first of all, I don't read novels to, relate to people. I'm like, please, I want a world with dragons. I don't want this world where I have to wake up at 6 a.m. to catch a bus every morning. That's boring. But they focus a lot more on that coming into yourself, growing up, making new friends, whereas a lot of upper YA tend to focus a lot more on romance, or a lot more on like being badass. And I'd also say middle grade has really expanded in the last couple of years. So that's, becoming more mature or having different themes about family and friendship. Now, new adult is becoming more of a thing, and people are constantly arguing over, what is age banding, what is appropriate, where are the boundaries. And I get why so many people are saying new adult shouldn't be a genre, and I would agree to that. I don't think it's a genre or a category. I think it's an age band. And I also don't necessarily think that upper middle grade or lower YA needs to have their own age bands, or they have to have their own separate shelves in a bookstore. But I do think having lower YA options under the umbrella of young adult literature is a valuable niche and option to have. So I thought I would finish up this video with some recommendations for some lower YA novels that I happen to really enjoy and endorse. One of my favorites that is from, oh man, hold on, what year is this from? 2005! Oh no! I promise I'll give you more recent ones in just a minute. One of my favorite ones to always recommend is Elsewhere by Gabrielle Zevin. Our 15-year-old main character Liz gets into a freak car accident, and her soul ends up going to this place called Elsewhere, where you age backwards until you are a baby and then you get sent down the river of rebirth. She ends up meeting her grandmother, who passed before she was born, who now looks about 35, along with a new cast of friends that she meets in this afterlife, as she both has to come to terms with the fact that she will never get her old life back, but also how is she going to make a life for herself now that she is dead. To this day, I think Gabrielle Zevin really gets that teenage voice down that goes into the complications of being a teenager who wants to be independent but also has to, still deal with her family. This book is so fun and fast. It talks about a really morbid topic in a really engaging and like lighthearted way. Plus there's big themes on, finding joy in your life again, finding new meaning, moving on, meeting new people. If you do want something a little bit more romantic, may I recommend a classic. That is The Selection by Kira Cass. Yes, I like to make fun of this book a lot, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't fall into the lower YA category. If you want a dystopian romance reminiscent of The Bachelor with actually a pretty good maid love interest, I think this book would be so fun for you. Main character is a redhead America singer who looks a lot like me, competes in this competition to raise her family out of this caste system that this world depends on, works on, runs on. And in her stay, she will have to deal with feuding families, royal politics, and frenemies galore, along with some like actually good friendship dynamics. And like I said, a surprisingly good love interest. I really like Maxon. I think he's a really sweet guy. This is giving me major nostalgia to hold this up right now. Maybe I should reread this. So the other books I'm thinking of, I do not have physical copies of, so one shall appear whenever I need it to right here. So we're first going to talk about one of the newest books that I think would be perfect for this list that did come out this year, and that is Gallant by v.e.schwab. Yes, I originally did have a physical copy of this book. Don't ask me what happened to it. One of the things that really surprised me with this book is how much of a perfect lower YA this is. Our main character, Olivia, is an orphan in a boarding school who gets a mysterious letter from a dead family member bequeathing her this large mansion named Gallant. She ends up falling into this generations-long curse and has to try and figure out a way to keep the dark at bay. This book does have that dark, slight horror that v.e.schwab is known for. It has super beautiful writing. Our main character is also mute, so it's so interesting to see how she connects with the outside world and how people underestimate her. I finished this book in a day. It is darkly whimsical and like everything I love about v.e.schwab. So like, you want some gateway v.e.schwab? This is the way to do it. Okay, now I'm gonna stand on this side of the screen because, you know, switch things up a bit. Next book I'm gonna mention is The Dark Rise by C.S. Pacat. This is an interesting twist on basically every well-known trope today. This is a Regency-era urban fantasy where our main character, Will, is a dock worker who ends up being the long-lost heir to this magical dynasty of people who have been holding the dark at bay for centuries. He joins up with his best friend and a magical mentor and a couple of other interesting secret society members to, you know, vanquish it once again. C.S. Pacat gives a little twist to everyone that makes this so much more interesting. I thought the dark magic was really cool, and I really like our rival who ends up getting pulled into the merry band of thieves as it was. This book is great for people who are getting into high fantasy. It's a great starting point that also has things that push your reading comprehension a little bit without being too like over the top. And if you or someone you know is a Tolkien fan, oh, you are going to love this book. There are so many parallels to it that are so well done. Okay, we're gonna head back to this side of the screen again. And lastly is a book I recommended in my video from last week, which was ranking Hades and Persephone retellings, which I will age band now. Please be over the age of 17 before you watch that video. I know a lot of you right now are saying, Rachel, you're not my real dad, but guess what? I can tell your mom. If you want a low fantasy, slightly romantic, friendship-based Hades and Persephone retelling, I would highly recommend you check out The Goddess Test by Amy Carter. This is like peak low YA. I think this book does so many things, and it does it at such an accessible level. It's a Greek mythology retelling, there's a little bit of history, there's a lot of stuff like friendship, family, and falling in love, growing into yourself, and realizing toxic traits with yourself, but also like other people. Our main character ends up making a deal with our Hades, aka Henry, to go through a series of tests to help break a curse that is on him. Meanwhile, she makes friends with some of the people in the mansion that she is staying in, as well as have a really lovely relationship with her mother. And if I love anything, it is a book that has a found family, a lovely love interest, some great supportive friends, the Greek gods, and like a dreamy romantic love interest who likes reading in bed in black silk pajamas. Amazing. So yeah, the book recommendations were my concluding paragraph, so let's wrap this up. Like I always say, please leave down below if you have your own recommendations for lower YA novels, or even upper middle grade, because I know nothing about middle grade. YA is my domain. I don't plan on switching that anytime soon, so I need to, you know, take on other people to like help me round out my recommendations. As somebody who's read YA for 14 years, you know, I've seen how the genre's changed, and I've seen what's been popular, I've seen what's kind of fallen off, and definitely lower YA has been shuffled under the rug. But like anything, book publishing is a business and they want to make money. And right now, what's making them money are the dark, sexy YA novels that do have a place in the market, but there's such an oversaturation of them that we're really not paying attention to like the actual people that these are for. Another thing is that a lot of these characters who are 16 are acting like they are 25, which could be for a couple of different reasons. It could be because of, you know, the editing, or it could be because of the writer being an older person and like writing what they think teens should like or would act. But what's way more realistic to being an actual teenager are the books that have the younger protagonists that are maybe a little bit less intensive. I've only been talking for like an hour. Why is my voice gone? I'm down to the dregs with my cup of tea, so maybe I need to go make another one and like rest my voice. I would also like to say that I just thrifted this shirt, and I feel like a lesbian wine aunt, and truly, I do think that is my final form. You know where to click to like the video, you know where to click to subscribe. I hope you guys are all having a nice day wherever you are, and I will see you all next week. Bye!